everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fridays with Fawn. I'm your host, Fawn Lopez, publisher of Modern Healthcare and Vice President of Crane Communications. Joining me today is Phoebe Yan, General Manager, NP Healthcare, Amazon Web Services. Phoebe will also be joining us. She'll be speaking at our Women Leaders in Healthcare conference this July. If you enjoy this conversation and want to connect with a community of strong women leaders in healthcare, please consider joining us at this conference. Welcome, Phoebe, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Fawn. It's such a privilege to be here. You are such an inspiration to me and so many other women. So thank you for including me in this series, which I love to watch myself.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's so kind of you. Phoebe, I would love to start by talking a little about your career journey. Prior to joining Amazon, you held key leadership positions at several major healthcare institutions, including Ascension and Mission Health. However, you went to law school at Stanford and started your career as an attorney. What inspired you to take a role in healthcare administration?
Thank you, Fawn. I love to solve problems. And there are no more essential and universal problems than the problems of health and well-being. I was the eldest of three daughters of an immigrant single-parent father. And I found through our generations of our family, there were lots of judges and lawyers and diplomats. So my father had his eye on me being the oldest as being the next generation's lawyer. But my life and his life took a really unexpected turn when the healthcare system for 3 years missed a pretty serious diagnosis that should have been caught. He had colorectal cancer that had metastasized into a tumor in his liver and passed away 4 months later. And that really changed the trajectory of my life. He was in his mid-50s at the time. But when he passed away, I took that moment of crisis in my life as an opportunity to reflect on what really inspired me. And I really wanted to do what mattered. I didn't want to get to the end of my life and think I didn't get to use that time the way I wanted. And what mattered to me was contributing to bringing life and healing and health to a broken and hurting world. And so after spending some time in the media and entertainment industry and in a couple of stints in government, I really felt that I came to healthcare really for 3 reasons. One is the people. I love working with people in healthcare. They are some of the most passionate, inspired, self-sacrificial servants out there, and they inspire me every day. 2 is I love the mission of healing and hope and life. And 3, you probably can't have a more complex industry than healthcare. And I love to solve problems and fix fragmented systems and learn new areas. So it's a great place for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing such personal story. I'm sorry to hear about your father.
Thank you.
And but incidentally, I too am one of 6 kids and one of 5 girls. And my father also had a career picked out for me when I was younger. I'm not doing what he had wanted me to do. So we share similar backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so how have you leveraged your legal and healthcare experience to in your role at as GM at Amazon today? Are there key principles of innovation, whether in healthcare or technology, that you find useful?
Yeah, both in law and in healthcare, what I have found is there are lots of complex problems. And in order to solve those problems, you can't just ride on the surface. You really have to get to the root causes of what they are. Why are they really broken? And what's really driving that brokenness? And so in law, I learned to critically think. I learned to not assume that things are the way that they're supposed to be just because they've always been that way. I learned that things that are worth fighting for are always about people and not about things or material possessions. And I learned that, in life, it's worthwhile to choose what is right over what is easy. And so as I came into healthcare and began to do a lot of work, particularly in innovation, I really found that what I learned in my upbringing, to share a little bit of personal anecdote, I grew up in a small community called Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where there was a historically Black college and university. And my father was a professor there. And what I learned growing up as a Asian American in a largely Black community is there are a lot of interesting things happening at the margins. I think the human nature is to gravitate to the center and where the buzz is and the cool stuff is. And the center is often what drives our attention and our energy. But many people ignore or diminish or underestimate what's happening at the margins. And the monolithic approach towards the center often is not the most innovative approach. I'll give you an example. When I was working in the media industry at a large incumbent media company, I had an opportunity to run a bunch of deals. And I was a mid-level, I was a VP, so I had a signing authority for the company. But most of the C-suite was sort of jockeying to do the big deals, with the big distributors like Comcast and DirecTV, et cetera. And so I got, quote unquote, stuck doing those little deals that nobody really cared about. They knew they had to deal with, but they didn't really know how, and they weren't worth a lot of money in the beginning. But that's where the innovation was happening. And so I learned, in the small community I grew up in, to pay attention to things happening at the margins, because that's where sometimes the most interesting things happen.
Good for you. That's great. Thank you for sharing. So you've had such an amazing and accomplished career. Besides holding key leadership positions at major institutions, just as I mentioned before, you also sit on corporate boards, and you also have served the FCC chairman's principal advisor on broadband innovation and investment from 2009 to 2011. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So what have you found to be key elements of success for women in leadership? What qualities and experiences have served you well?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that I look for in a leader and that I strive to be is to have integrity. It's so much easier to cut corners, to do what's easy over what's good, to skim over challenges rather than dive into them, to overlook a moment of conflict rather than try to drive towards a solution. And I think in those moments when you have that temptation, really staying true to course on why you're there and having integrity in the process really serves well, because people notice and they want to follow a leader of integrity. And that's true for women and men. But I find, as a woman leader, that is often being very closely paid attention to. I also think, just striving for excellence in all that we do, not thinking that any task is too small or unimportant to really give your all and your best to. You have to set priorities. You can't be everything to everyone, but really insisting on excellence has really served the leaders that I know and admire really well. And then really build the community, right? Oftentimes you walk into a situation or a role or a problem, and people are at odds. And what I find that is if you seek out, often they're at the margins, if you seek out those folks who are in fact operating with excellence, seeking integrity in what they do, and you invest in those relationships, a lot of really wonderful things can happen that you didn't anticipate could happen. And so forming that community is really not only sort of professionally rewarding, but also personally, it makes it so much more meaningful day in, day out as to how you do and what you do. And then finally, my dad always said, always be grateful. And so I try to teach my kids that the leading indicator of happiness in our world is not who has the most money, not who has the biggest title, not who has the nicest car, but it's really who who are the grateful people. Those typically are the happiest people. And so as a leader, I try to be grateful as well.
I don't you think that building or being part of a community is more important now than ever,
Oh,
especially what we've lived through or still living in uh, during the pandemic?
for sure, for sure. This last year has been heartbreaking and painful on so many levels, and both with respect to the effects of the pandemic, but also the implications of just seeing how broken some of our systems really are. And so now is the time when we have to come together. I even in the midst of what we've seen both in the social sense as well as in the public health sense. I'm just reminded that when I was little, I had a teacher who said, whenever you see something that is scary or that is un- extremely unpleasant, always look for those who are helping, those who are looking for opportunities to help, and you'll always find them. And that's what we need now more than ever, as you said.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there were any hurdles you faced, and as a woman and as an Asian, that you've had to overcome to get to where you are today, and what were they, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we all face hurdles. I do think women and women of color, and in my experience, Asian women face a set of hurdles, which you might also relate to, Fawn. And there just are a lot of stereotypes, right? And I think it's a lack of understanding or knowledge. And a lot of times they're just implicit biases that have very huge detrimental effect to people individually as well as communities. But there are also advantages I found to being a little different in an environment where no one else really looked like me, right? Very few people, and that made me resilient. It gave me eyes to recognize others who might feel marginalized or who may not be heard. And it taught me that what defines me is not how I'm treated. It's not what others say about me. What really defines me is who I am, at my core, what I believe, and how I choose to live. And so, in many ways, it's empowering to come to that realization at whatever point in life you come to it. And so for me, yes, I have faced subtle and not so subtle demonstrations of bias and inappropriate behavior, like many women and women of color have. But I try to develop what I consider spiritual and mental muscles around the discipline of looking up and not looking down.
That's
Um,
so good.
yeah.
That's such great advice. Please
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's true. Well, one of my favorite writers, I underline it and have it taped up on my wall, is said, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, anything that is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. And so if your eyes are fixed on things that are good, then you will have a greater propensity to bring good into all of your spheres of influence. So,
Absolutely. So you've had such a diverse and distinguished career as a leader. When you reflect upon your career, who has been who's had the greatest influence on your career and why?
oh, there's so many. But I can't, when I think about my career, I think about what does the end of it look like? And what can I look back on? And without a doubt, the person who had the biggest influence is my father. He was a professor at an HBCU, as I mentioned. He faced challenges, biases, assumptions about who he was, but he insisted on not lowering his standards. He cared about the long-term success of his students, not the short-term gratification. And he quietly helped other immigrants. He recruited and welcomed new faculty from around the world, but not just well-heeled, well-educated immigrants. When he passed away, I discovered that people came to his funeral I had never met before, and they tried to pay me back for money he had lent to them personally to start businesses when they couldn't get cash advances, when they couldn't get loans from the bank, and he took out cash advances on his own credit card to really help some of these immigrants start a new life. And when he died, two Black fraternities showed up at his funeral and did a step show in his honor. And so all these things I saw at the end of his life that I never knew about him, and it made me realize he's not famous. He always had to have two jobs in order to make ends meet. But the sphere of influence and the legacy that he left, I still hear about today. Tomorrow will be the 25th anniversary of his passing, and I continue to hear about all these wonderful things that he did. And so when I think about that influence, that's probably the largest influence that I've had. There was, at the beginning of my career, a wonderful African-American woman, and she and I used to do these deals in Brazil and Latin America, which is very heavily male driven, right? And she and I were often the only women at the table, and then we happened to be women of color who were not, Portuguese speaking, and watching her navigate with confidence and ease that environment and really develop a compelling relationship with the clients and others, that was a huge motivator for me, because I thought, your difference doesn't have to be a negative. It can actually be a positive in your career and in life.
Absolutely. I know our audience would love to know a little about your leadership style. Is there a certain personality trait that you feel has helped you more than others and during your career, and especially as a leader?
Oh boy. I have the blessing of being surrounded by immensely talented colleagues in nearly every setting I have been in. But the important thing that I think it is helpful for me to remember is to be incredibly intellectually curious, to accept the fact that you don't know everything, and not be afraid to ask those questions. Really understand what the root causes are, what makes things tick, what makes people tick, and really be truly interested. I think that helps to drive sort of my ability to lead, because the people that I'm engaged with know that I'm really interested in them. And then set high standards for myself first, and expect that everyone else will also have high standards, because that will be a great opportunity to both model out but achieve more than you think that you can. So I think the last thing is I, in each case that I get to have an opportunity to step into a role of leadership, I see that as an act of stewardship. And so we have an opportunity to use our force, our energy, to push people down or to lift people up. You can't do both at the same time. And so in those moments where, I have an opportunity to be a leader and to step out front, I really strive, and I'm sure there are days when I fail, but I really strive to lift people up. Because when you lift people up, more people will come. And it may not always be popular or in your best self-interest, but over time, that's the kind of leader I want to follow, and that's the kind of leader I would like to be.
And that's the kind of leader I want to be. And I would say, knowing you, another trait that's very important to your success is empathy. You have a lot of it. And so it's wonderful to see that in a leader.
Thank you.
So anyway, so you're also a mother to two young children. Is that correct?
Yes.
As a working mom, you know firsthand the struggles working women or mothers face.
Yeah.
How have you approached pivots in your career and in life?
Yeah, with respect to my career, I'll just say that, and I tell, people that I mentor or sponsor that what's really important is not often what people focus on. So it's not about the title. It's not even, it's not about the organization even necessarily. What's important is that regardless of whether you're sitting in first class, second class, or third class, that you get on the train that's going in the right direction and you find your sponsor. This could be the most important leading indicator of success professionally is often who you choose to be your sponsor and whom you choose to sponsor, because those are things that help, again, to lift us all up. In that context, those are how I have chosen to make pivots in my career, alongside the sort of really strong intellectual curiosity. With respect to being a parent, I have the blessing of being an older parent, which is wonderful because I've learned lessons from peers and friends of mine who now have children who are adults, almost. And if I were meeting my 28-year-old self today, I would probably say that, as think about where you want to end up and work back from that. So, as I approach the end of my life, what will matter most to me is not if I closed that last deal. It's not if I won that case. It's not if I consummated that merger, although those things may be really important in my day-to-day life. What will matter most is if when a little 6-year-old girl comes into my office while I'm frantically working and hands me a handwritten note asking to sit in my lap, it'll matter that she knows that I love her. It'll matter when my son, who wants to play me a piece he's just composed on the piano, it matters that he knows I'm proud of him. It matters that a friend knows that they can confide in me when they need me. And so, and what matters to me is knowing that when faced with a hard decision, I've chosen the path that is good and right over what may have been convenient or easy or seemed like it was best for me. Even when nobody else is looking, those are the kinds of choices I want to make. Those are the things that matter. But I think if we look back at our lives, then it helps us to frame both our professional life, but also our personal life, and order it in the way that we would like.
Good for you. I could talk to you for 9 hours. love your wisdom. Love the way you approach life and work. So my next question is deeply personal. So the wave of attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders has been emotionally gutting for me. We also know that Asian Americans are 3 times less likely than our white counterparts to use mental health service, which makes the problem even more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
How have the recent incidents of violence against Asians impacted you, and how have you been able to cope personally?
Yes, thanks for that question. I appreciate the opportunity to, have a forum for all of us to speak about things that are deeply painful. I, like you and like so many, have really felt a great deal of pain and sadness and even brokenness about where we are as a nation. It's not new. It's come to the surface as a result of recent events. And I think in that context, what I said earlier about focusing on the people who are helping and focusing on what is good and driving and building on that has been sort of my sustaining guide in all of this, along with a lot of prayer. But I will say, on a personal level, a number of years ago, Fawn, when I was taking a pivot in my career and I moved from law to policy and then moved into corporate development because I wanted to be on the business side of things. I had to learn how to do discounted cash flow analyses and value companies and all kinds of things, run Excel spreadsheets. I still have the Excel for Dummies book that I bought back then. I had to learn a little bit more than they taught me there. But in the context of that, I remember doing a study on mergers and acquisitions and how you value companies. And I realized that there's some truisms in corporate finance that actually translate to how we think about ourselves. And specifically what I mean is hostile takeovers, and you think about hostile takeovers of companies, they occur when the target company undervalues its own worth. And so if we allow these sorts of attacks on our communities and ourselves to devalue who we really are, then that's when the hostile takeovers take over in our soul, right? And only we have control over that. And so a savvy, aggressive investor will know the real value and will actually pay a price below the true worth, but higher than what the target company thinks it can get. And when that happens in life, we as people, need to be able to discern, have the wisdom to discern, what is helpful feedback, and take the feedback that's worthwhile, but take these brutal, unjust attacks and really be able to see them for what they are and not allow us to be taken down. I love the woman who was attacked in San Francisco. Just wanted all of her GoFundMe donations to go towards fighting, hate crimes against Asians. I thought that was such a beautiful thing. And $1 million. I mean, those are the kind of people that I'm so inspired by, and the resilience of the spirit that I also want to have.
Thank you for your openness in talking about this, Phoebe. As painful and scary as it has been, I'm, like you, also very hopeful for the future.
Yeah.
The recent incidents have sparked conversation about hate crimes against Asians and Asian women. It's encouraging to see how people are responding to this issue. Many community leaders have taken a vocal stance on interracial solidarity, and some have turned to local organizations to show their support. Last week's passing of anti-Asian hate crime bill was a very positive step forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, and those things, I agree, Fawn. Those things are not only really important as matters of principle, but they're also incredibly healing for a community. Like, where it doesn't heal the whole thing, but it really helps to know that we're not in this alone. I couldn't agree with you more.
Again, like I said, I could talk to you for another 9 hours, but we only have a few more minutes. So I want to thank you for your time and for also your willingness to participate at our Women Leaders in Healthcare conference this July.
Oh, I can't wait. That's going to be so great. Having done that conference before, I will tell you, and this isn't rehearsed, I will just tell you that was I walked out of there and I called a friend of mine. I said, this is the single most inspiring group and setting I have ever seen. I mean, just the esprit de corps and the positive encouragement, but the real honest discussion that happens at that conference is, I've just never seen it any other place. It's really wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, and we are excited to have you participate at this year's conference. And as you know, the theme is the power of resilience and recovery. And you talked a little bit about resilient earlier in your comments. I have a final question for you, and that is, please share your final words of advice for women, especially women leaders, on how to be resilient.
Oh, wow. I could learn so much from your audience myself, but I would say, the resilience all lies within you. it is wonderful to have community, but also remember to have community with yourself, because otherwise sometimes you can get lost in what everybody else thinks, even well-intentioned people think you should be. And you know deep down, you know who you are, and what is important to you. And there is so much strength in that, and it's far beyond anything that anybody could ever take away from you. So remaining sort of centered on who you were made to be, and your calling in that, I think is the most important aspect of resilience. And then finding those communities of others who also are seeking excellence and integrity, and know the value of human life and people, and why we're all here. So,
Thank you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
oh, likewise.
Can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
It's an
Thank-
honor. It's an honor. Thank you so much, Fawn.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As always, I look forward to seeing you on the next Fridays with Fawn, and hope to see you at our Women Leaders in Healthcare conference. The event is scheduled on July 22nd and 23rd. We put together a fantastic agenda and an amazing roster of speakers for you. So, as an incentive for watching this episode of Fridays with Fawn, we would be more than happy to give you a 15% discount off the current registration fee. Please use the code Fridays at checkout when you go to register on modernhealthcare.com. I look forward to seeing you there, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Fridays with Fawn. Thank you for watching.